The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Clara Wilson's face as she stared down at the letter in her trembling hands, the words blurring through her tears. 3 years of marriage to a man who never existed, a charade so elaborate she couldn't distinguish truth from fiction anymore. Her entire life in Loveland, Colorado territory had been built upon shifting sand, and now the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. Mrs. Wilson. The deep voice startled her, and she quickly folded the letter, tucking it into the pocket of her worn cotton dress. Looking up, Clara found herself staring into the clear blue eyes of Ethan Zachary, the rugged cowboy whose ranch bordered what she had believed was her husband's property, now revealed as stolen land purchased with counterfeit money. She'd seen him around town, of course. Loveland wasn't large enough in 1876 for folks not to know one another, but they'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. "It's just Miss Ward now, apparently," Clara said, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of Loveland's dusty Main Street. Or perhaps it always was. Ethan's weathered face registered confusion as he removed his hat, revealing sun-lightened brown hair. "I don't understand, madam," Clara laughed bitterly, gesturing toward the sheriff's office she'd just exited. "Sheriff Mills has informed me that James Wilson never existed. The man I married 3 years ago was actually Thomas Blackburn, wanted in 4 states for fraud, theft, and worse." She swallowed hard. "He's been living a double life with another wife in Denver, it seems." Ethan's face darkened. At 32, he'd seen his share of the West's harshness, but the pain in Clara's eyes struck him deeply. "I'm right sorry to hear that," he said, his voice genuine. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Clara glanced up at the tall cowboy, noting his honest expression. At 26, she'd thought she understood the world and the people in it. Now she felt like a fool. "Unless you can replace 3 years of my life or restore my family's savings that he stole, I'm afraid not," she replied, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. "I apologize, Mr. Zachary." "That was unkind." "You've got reason enough to be unkind today," he answered simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "They say your husband, that Blackburn fellow, was a lie. If that's so, then let me be your truth, Miss Ward, at least until you get your bearings." Clara blinked in surprise at his forthright offer. "My truth? I mean to say, I can help you sort through this mess. No strings attached." He shifted his weight from one boot to another. "I've got a spare cabin on my property. My sister lived there before she married and moved to Cheyenne. You could stay there while you figure out your next steps." Clara's instinct was to refuse. Trusting another man seemed like the height of foolishness after what she'd just learned. But the reality of her situation was bearing down on her like a locomotive. The bank would take the house. She had barely enough money for a week at the boarding house. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked, searching his face for ulterior motives. "We ain't exactly strangers. I've seen you at church and around town for years," Ethan replied. "Besides, my ma raised me to believe that offering help to those in need wasn't charity, it was just being human." The mention of his mother softened something in Clara. "She sounds like a wise woman." "The wisest," Ethan confirmed, a small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "What do you say?" "The cabin's just sitting there empty and winter's coming on. It would be a shame to let it go to waste when you could use it." Clara hesitated, looking down the street toward what she'd thought was her home. The house where she'd sewn curtains, planted flowers, and dreamed of filling with children someday. All built on lies. "I accept your offer, Mr. Zachary," she finally said, "but only temporarily until I can make other arrangements." "Call me Ethan," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "And temporary is fine by me. I'll come by tomorrow morning with the wagon to help you move whatever belongs to you." "Thank you," Clara whispered, the weight on her shoulders lightening just a fraction. "Though I'm not even sure what truly belongs to me anymore." Ethan's eyes held hers steadily. "Well, that's something we'll figure out together." As Clara watched him walk away, she couldn't help wondering if she was making another terrible mistake. But with her world crumbling around her, Ethan Zachary's unexpected kindness was the only solid ground she could find. The next morning dawned bright and cold, a typical October day in the Colorado Territory. Clara had spent a sleepless night at the boarding house, her mind spinning with questions and memories. How could she have been so blind? The frequent business trips, the vague explanations about his past, the way he never wanted to have his photograph taken, all signs she'd overlooked in her desire to believe in the love they shared. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Ward," he said. "Wagon's out front whenever you're ready," Clara nodded. "I've already been to the house. Sheriff Mills allowed me to gather my personal belongings yesterday evening." She gestured to 2 trunks and a carpet bag beside the bed. "This is all I have now." Ethan's eyes registered surprise at the meager collection, but he made no comment. "Let me get those for you." At the house, she'd shared with James or Thomas, or whatever his real name was. The sheriff had explained that everything would be sold to repay the people Blackburn had swindled. She'd been permitted to take only what she could prove was hers from before the marriage: her clothes, a few books, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the quilt her grandmother had made. When they arrived at Ethan's ranch, Clara was struck by its understated prosperity. The main house was solidly built of logs with a stone foundation, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings. A corral held several fine horses, and cattle grazed in the distance. It wasn't the largest ranch in the area, but it was substantial and clearly well run. "Your land is beautiful," Clara commented as they drove past a grove of aspen trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the morning light. "Been in the family since '58. Ethan replied with pride. "My father staked his claim when the gold rush was bringing folks through. He wasn't interested in mining, though. Always said good cattle on good land was more reliable than striking it rich." "He was right," Clara said softly. Her own father, a storekeeper back in Ohio, had died chasing rumors of gold in California, leaving her mother to raise Clara alone. When her mother passed 5 years ago, Clara had come west as a mail-order bride, answering an advertisement placed by James Wilson, a prosperous rancher seeking a sensible wife. Ethan guided the wagon toward a small cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house. It was a simple structure but well-built, with a covered porch and smoke already rising from the chimney. "I sent Miguel ahead to light a fire," Ethan explained, noting her surprise at the smoke. "He and his wife Rosa manage the household for me. They live in the quarters behind the main house." Clara nodded, feeling somewhat relieved that there would be another woman nearby. "That was thoughtful, thank you." The cabin's interior was clean and sparsely furnished with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small cook stove. A door led to what Clara assumed was a bedroom. Simple curtains framed the windows and a braided rug covered part of the plank floor. "It's not fancy," Ethan said, sounding almost apologetic as he set her trunks down. "It's perfect," Clara assured him, touched by the simplicity and warmth of the space. After the false grandeur of her life with James, the honest humbleness of the cabin was refreshing. Ethan cleared his throat. "Rosa stocked the pantry with basics, and there's a well just outside. If you need anything else, just let us know. The main house is close enough if you need help, but far enough that you'll have your privacy." Clara turned to face him fully. "Mr. Zachary, Ethan, I don't know how to thank you properly for this." He waved away her thanks with a calloused hand. "No need." Like I said, the place was just sitting empty. An awkward silence fell between them. Clara realized this was the first time in years she had been alone with a man who wasn't her supposed husband. "I should let you settle in," Ethan finally said, backing toward the door. "Supper's at 6 if you'd care to join us at the main house. No obligation, of course." "I'd like that," Clara replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The thought of sitting alone with her thoughts for the entire evening was unbearable. After Ethan left, Clara unpacked her few belongings, trying to make the space feel like her own. As she worked, she realized how little she truly had that represented her. James had always chosen the furnishings, the artwork, even many of her dresses. He'd controlled every aspect of their life together, all while living his other existence elsewhere. When evening approached, Clara changed into her best remaining dress, a simple blue cotton with white piping that she'd sewn herself. She pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun and pinched her pale cheeks to bring some color to them. Dinner at the main house was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Rosa, a plump Mexican woman with a ready smile, had prepared a hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie. Miguel, tall and lean with a magnificent mustache, entertained them with stories about the cattle and the upcoming winter preparations. Throughout the meal, Clara noticed Ethan watching her, his gaze thoughtful rather than intrusive. When their eyes met, he didn't look away as most men would, but offered a small, encouraging smile. "How long have you worked for Mr. Zachary?" Clara asked Rosa as they cleared the dinner plates. 10 years now," Rosa replied warmly, "since he took over the ranch after his father passed." "He is a good man, Senora, the best employer we could ask for," Clara nodded, filing away this information. "And has he never married?" Rosa's dark eyes sparkled with understanding. "There was a young woman once, many years ago. She could not handle the isolation of ranch life and returned east." She paused, lowering her voice. "He deserves happiness, that one, too long alone." Before Clara could respond, Ethan entered the kitchen and Rosa busied herself with the pie. Later, as he walked her back to the cabin in the moonlight, Clara found herself warming to Ethan's quiet presence. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they reached her door. "It was nice not to be alone with my thoughts tonight." "Thoughts can be dangerous companions sometimes," he agreed, "especially when they're full of questions without answers." Clara looked up at him in surprise. "That's exactly it." "How did you know?" Ethan's face was half hidden in shadow. "I've had my share of sleepless nights wondering why things happened the way they did. After my father died, after Kathleen left, sometimes there aren't any good answers." The mention of Kathleen piqued Clara's curiosity, but she didn't press. They'd both revealed enough for one evening. "Well, good night then," she said, opening her door. "Good night, Clara," Ethan replied. "Remember, you've got friends here. You don't have to face everything alone anymore." As Clara lay in bed that night, she realized it was the first time in 3 years that someone had offered her support without expecting anything in return. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Clara fell into a routine at the Zachary Ranch. Each morning, she'd rise early and help Rosa with breakfast for the ranch hands. During the day, she'd work on mending clothes, preserving the last of the fall harvest, or helping with other household tasks. It wasn't charity, she insisted on earning her keep, and Ethan respected her enough not to argue. One evening in early November, Clara was walking back from the main house when she noticed Ethan in the corral, working with a spirited young mare. She paused to watch him, admiring his gentle but firm approach with the animal. There was no cruelty in his methods, just patient persistence. "She's beautiful," Clara called out, approaching the fence. Ethan looked up with a smile. "She is at that. Still got some wildness in her, though." "What's her name?" Clara asked, leaning on the fence rail. "Doesn't have one yet. Thought I'd let her tell me who she is first," Ethan replied, giving the horse a final pat before joining Clara at the fence. "Some things shouldn't be rushed." Their eyes met, and Clara felt a flutter in her chest that both alarmed and excited her. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, breaking the moment. "Town's having that harvest festival on Saturday. Thought you might want to go, get out a bit, see some folks." Clara tensed. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Everyone knows what happened by now." "Yes, they do," Ethan acknowledged, "and they all blame Blackburn, not you. You're the victim here, Clara." "That almost makes it worse," she said softly, being pitied. Ethan's gaze was steady. "Nobody who knows you would pity you. Admire your strength, maybe, but not pity." Clara considered his words. "I'll think about it." The night of the festival arrived with a crisp chill in the air. Clara had decided to attend, wearing a green dress that Rosa had helped her alter to fit the current fashion. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, held back by a simple ribbon. Ethan's appreciative glance when she emerged from the cabin bolstered her courage. "You look lovely," he said simply. The festival was held in the town square, with lanterns strung between trees and tables laden with food. Music from fiddles and a banjo filled the air, and children darted between adults, their laughter infectious. At first, Clara felt every eye upon her, but as the evening progressed, she realized most people were genuinely glad to see her. Mrs. Finch, the milliner, greeted her warmly. Pastor Simmons and his wife invited her to join their church quilting circle. Even Sheriff Mills tipped his hat respectfully. "See," Ethan murmured as they walked past the bobbing for Apple's barrel, "you've got more friends than you realized." Clara smiled up at him, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you for convincing me to come." As the band struck up a lively reel, Ethan turned to her with an outstretched hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Ward?" Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Zachary." They joined the circle of dancers, moving through the steps of the country dance with surprising synchronicity. Clara found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in months as Ethan twirled her beneath his arm. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Clara expected him to lead her off the dance floor. Instead, he drew her closer, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. "Is this all right?" he asked, his voice low. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The warmth of his hand at her waist sent tingles through her body, and she was acutely aware of the solid strength of him as they moved together. "You're a fine dancer," she finally managed to say. "My mother insisted," Ethan replied with a small smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Clara laughed, relaxing into his arms. "She sounds wonderful. Is she? She passed 6 years ago," Ethan said. "Pneumonia took her, same winter as my father." "I'm sorry," Clara said, unconsciously tightening her grip on his hand. "Losing both parents at once must have been devastating." Ethan nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "It was, but they'd had 30 good years together. That's more than many get." As they continued to dance, Clara couldn't help contrasting this moment with her dances with James. Where James had been showy and flamboyant, Ethan moved with quiet confidence. Where James had held her as if displaying a prize, Ethan held her as if she were precious. The moment was shattered by a loud voice from the edge of the dance floor. "Well, ain't that sweet?" The fraudster's wife already found herself a new man to leech off of. Clara froze as she recognized Hiram Jenkins, the banker who'd lost the most money in James's schemes. His face was flushed with whiskey and anger. "Let it go, Jenkins," Ethan said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Clara. "Why should I?" Jenkins slurred. "That woman's husband stole near $2,000 from my bank. How do we know she wasn't in on it the whole time?" Clara felt the blood drain from her face as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Mills moved forward, his hand on his holster. "That's enough, Hiram. Miss Ward's been cleared of any wrongdoing." "Of course she has," Jenkins sneered. "Pretty women always get away with." His words were cut off as Ethan closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, grabbing the banker by his lapels. "You will apologize to the lady," Ethan said, his voice dangerously calm. "Now." The music had stopped and everyone was watching the confrontation with bated breath. Jenkins blustered. "I got a right to my opinion." "You got a right to keep a civil tongue in your head," Ethan interrupted. "Especially when speaking about a lady who's suffered enough because of her husband's actions. Now apologize, or we'll settle this another way." The tension stretched between them until Jenkins finally deflated. "Fine. I apologize, Mrs. Wilson, or whatever your name is." "It's Miss Ward," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I accept your apology, Mr. Jenkins. I understand your anger toward James, toward Thomas Blackburn. I share it. He deceived me even more completely than he did you." Her dignity in the face of Jenkins' accusations seemed to sway the crowd, and many nodded in approval. Sheriff Mills escorted Jenkins away, and slowly the music resumed. Ethan returned to Clara's side. "I'm sorry about that," Clara shook her head. "No need to apologize. You defended me when you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied simply. Then, noting her pale face, he added, "Would you like to go home?" Clara nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. As they approached the cabin, Clara turned to Ethan. "Thank you for tonight. Despite Mr. Jenkins, it was good to get out." Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "You handled yourself with grace." Most people would have crumpled under that kind of public accusation. "I've had practice lately," Clara said with a wry smile. "Seems my whole life has been one accusation after another since finding out about James." Ethan's expression turned serious. "You know, you're going to have to stop blaming yourself eventually." "Am I that transparent?" Clara asked, surprised. "Only to someone who's watching carefully," he replied. Then, after a brief hesitation, he added, "Good night, Clara, sweet dreams." As winter deepened its hold on Loveland, Clara found herself growing increasingly comfortable at the Zachary ranch. The small cabin had become a true home, filled with touches that reflected her personality rather than someone else's vision of who she should be. She'd hung simple curtains she'd sewn herself, arranged wildflowers Ethan sometimes brought her in a mason jar, and displayed her few books proudly on a shelf he'd built for her. More significantly, she'd begun to feel useful again. When Rosa fell ill with influenza in December, Clara took over the household management completely, coordinating meals for the ranch hands, keeping accounts, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Ethan had been impressed by her efficiency and business sense. "You've got a knack for numbers," he commented one evening as they sat at the kitchen table going over the ranch ledgers. "Better than me, that's for certain," Clara smiled, remembering how she'd kept her father's store books as a girl. "I've always enjoyed it. James never let me near our finances, though. Now I understand why." Ethan set down his pencil. "You know, I could use help with the books on a regular basis. If you're interested, I'd pay you properly for the work." Clara looked up in surprise. "You would?" "Of course," he replied matter-of-factly. "It's valuable work and you do it well. Why wouldn't I pay you?" The offer touched Clara deeply. It wasn't charity, it was recognition of her skills. "I'd like that very much." As Christmas approached, the ranch buzzed with preparation. Rosa, recovered from her illness, supervised the cooking of traditional Mexican dishes for the holiday feast, while Miguel and the ranch hands decorated the main house with pine boughs and ribbons. Clara found herself swept up in the festivities, helping to bake cookies and sew small gifts for everyone on the ranch. For Ethan, she secretly worked on a leather portfolio to hold his ranch documents and ledgers, tooling a design of aspen leaves around the edges. On Christmas Eve, snow began to fall, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. The ranch hands and their families gathered in the main house for a celebratory dinner, followed by music and dancing. Miguel played the guitar while Rosa led them in Spanish carols, their voices rising in harmony. Later, as the party wound down and people began drifting back to their homes, Ethan asked Clara to stay behind. "I have something for you," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He retrieved a package from his desk drawer and handed it to her. "Merry Christmas, Clara." She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials CW embossed in gold on the cover. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I noticed you writing sometimes in the evenings," he explained, "but you were using loose papers. Thought you might like something proper to keep your thoughts in." Clara was deeply moved by his attentiveness. "It's perfect, thank you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her gift for him. "I have something for you too." Ethan's face lit up with pleasure as he unwrapped the portfolio. "Clara, this is exquisite work," he said, examining the detailed tooling. "Did you make this yourself?" She nodded, pleased by his reaction. "Rosa helped me with some of the techniques, but yes, do you truly like it?" "I love it," he said sincerely. "Best gift I've had in years." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the hearth. "It's still snowing," Clara observed, looking out the window. "I should probably head back before it gets too deep." "I'll walk you," Ethan said, reaching for his coat. Outside, the world had been transformed into a winter wonderland, the falling snow muffling all sound. They walked slowly toward Clara's cabin, their boots crunching in the fresh powder. Halfway there, Clara impulsively stuck out her tongue to catch a snowflake. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cold air. "I haven't seen anyone do that since I was a boy," Clara blushed. "My mother always said each snowflake was a wish waiting to be caught." "And what did you wish for?" Ethan asked softly. Clara looked up at him, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "I can't tell you. It won't come true if I do." They had reached her door, but neither seemed eager to end the evening. Snowflakes swirled around them in the lantern light, creating a private world of white. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice husky. "I want you to know that but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a shout from the direction of the main house. They turned to see Miguel running toward them through the snow. "Señor Ethan, come quickly." "One of the pregnant mares is having trouble with her foaling." Ethan's expression immediately shifted to concern. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Clara apologetically. "I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course," she replied, understanding the urgency. "Go, save the mare and her foal." He nodded gratefully, then surprised her by quickly leaning down to press a kiss to her cheek. "Merry Christmas, Clara," he murmured before turning to follow Miguel toward the stables. Clara stood in the doorway long after they'd disappeared, her hand touching the spot where his lips had been, wondering what he had been about to tell her. The new year brought changes to Clara's life at the ranch. With her new position managing the books, she spent more time in Ethan's office in the main house. Their working relationship was comfortable and productive, but there was an undercurrent of something more simmering beneath the surface. Occasionally, their hands would brush as they exchanged papers, or their eyes would meet and hold for a beat too long. Neither spoke of these moments, but Clara found herself thinking of them in the quiet of her cabin at night. In February, a letter arrived that disrupted the peaceful rhythm they'd established. Clara was in the main house when Sheriff Mills delivered it personally. "This came from the federal marshal in Denver," he explained, handing her the envelope. "Thought you might want some privacy to read it." Clara's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a formal letter informing her that Thomas Blackburn had been captured attempting to flee to Mexico. He was being charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and bigamy. The marshal requested her presence at the trial in Denver the following month. Ethan found her still staring at the letter an hour later, sitting alone in the kitchen. "Clara, what is it?" he asked, alarmed by her pallor. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "You don't have to go," he said when he finished reading. "You could write a statement instead." Clara shook her head. "No, I need to see this through. I need to look him in the eye and hear him admit what he did to me." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand, but you're not facing him alone. I'm going with you." Clara started to protest, but Ethan held up a hand. "This isn't up for debate. I'm going with you to Denver." His protectiveness touched her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. The journey to Denver took 3 days by stagecoach. Clara was grateful for Ethan's solid presence beside her as the coach jolted along rough trails and through mountain passes. They stayed in separate rooms at boarding houses along the way, maintaining propriety despite the growing closeness between them. Denver was larger and more sophisticated than Clara had imagined. Brick buildings lined the streets, and gas lamps illuminated the sidewalks. They checked into a respectable hotel near the courthouse with adjoining rooms for safety and convenience. That evening, Clara stood at her window, looking out at the busy street below. The trial would begin tomorrow, and anxiety knotted her stomach. A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning as Ethan entered. "Just wanted to check if you needed anything," he said, hovering in the doorway. "And to remind you that you don't have to go through with this if it becomes too difficult." Clara smiled gratefully. "I'll be all right, especially knowing you're there." Ethan stepped further into the room, his expression serious. "Clara, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, something I've felt for a while now." Her heart began to race. "Yes." He began, but was interrupted by another knock, this one at the hallway door. Clara sighed and went to answer it. A young messenger boy handed her a note before scampering off. She opened it and frowned. "It's from the prosecutor," she explained to Ethan. "He wants to meet with me tonight to prepare for tomorrow." She glanced at the clock. "In half an hour," Ethan nodded, hiding his disappointment. "I'll escort you." "What were you going to say?" Clara asked, reluctant to let the moment pass. He shook his head. "It can wait until after the trial." "You have enough on your mind right now." The courthouse was packed the next morning. Clara sat rigidly in the front row beside Ethan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Thomas Blackburn was led in, shackled and wearing prison clothes, she barely recognized the man she had called husband. His once immaculate appearance was disheveled, his confident bearing replaced by a sullen slouch. He looked around the courtroom and froze when his eyes met Clara's. For a brief moment, she glimpsed something like shame in his expression before his gaze slid away. The trial proceeded with methodical efficiency. Multiple victims testified about Blackburn's elaborate cons and the money they had lost. Clara listened, increasingly horrified as the full extent of his crimes was revealed. He had at least 3 wives in different cities and had swindled dozens of people out of their life savings. When it was Clara's turn to testify, she rose on shaky legs. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly as she passed. On the witness stand, Clara spoke clearly and truthfully about her marriage to the man she had known as James Wilson. She described how he had courted her through letters after her mother's death, how he had seemed so caring and attentive during their first years together, and how she had never suspected his frequent business trips were visits to his other families. "Did you at any point suspect that your husband was engaged in criminal activities?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Clara replied firmly. "He kept me completely isolated from his business dealings. When I would ask questions, he would tell me not to worry my pretty head about such matters." She paused. "I realize now that my isolation was deliberate. He made sure I had few close friends in Loveland, and he discouraged me from forming relationships with our neighbors." When the prosecutor finished, Blackburn's defense attorney rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Blackburn," he began. "Miss Ward," Clara corrected firmly. "I was never legally Mrs. Blackburn, as your client was already married when he fraudulently wed me." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Ward, then, are you certain you never suspected anything amiss in your supposed husband's affairs?" "A woman of your intelligence surely must have had some inkling." Clara felt her cheeks flush with anger and shame. "Sir, when you trust someone completely, you don't look for deception in their every word and deed. That's what trust means." From the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan nodding in agreement, his face a mask of barely contained anger at the attorney's implication. "And yet," the lawyer continued smoothly, "you've certainly landed on your feet quite quickly. Already living on another man's property, I understand." Before Clara could respond, the prosecutor was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Miss Ward's current living situation has no bearing on this case and is merely an attempt to impugn her character." "Sustained," the judge ruled sharply. "Counsel will stick to relevant questions about the defendant's actions." The rest of the cross-examination passed in a blur. When Clara was finally allowed to step down, she felt drained but strangely empowered. She had faced her deceiver and held her ground. The trial lasted 3 days, with testimony from numerous witnesses. On the final day, the jury took less than an hour to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. Blackburn was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. As the courtroom began to empty, Clara found herself face to face with Blackburn as he was being led away. He stopped, guards on either side of him. "Clara," he said, his voice lacking the charm she had once found so appealing. "For what it's worth, I did care for you in my way." She studied the man who had appended her life, searching for some trace of the person she thought she had loved. "It's worth nothing, Thomas, nothing at all," he flinched at her words. "I suppose I deserve that." "You deserve far worse," she replied calmly. "But I won't waste any more of my life on hatred. You've taken enough from me already." As the guards led him away, Clara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She turned to find Ethan watching her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, surprising herself with how true it was. "Yes, I think I finally am." That evening, they celebrated the verdict with dinner at Denver's finest restaurant. Clara wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Ethan, in a proper suit rather than his ranch clothes, looked distinguished and handsome. "To justice," he said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. "To truth," Clara countered, clinking her glass against his. "And to new beginnings." Ethan's eyes warmed. "I'll drink to that." As they enjoyed their meal, Clara found herself relaxing fully for the first time in months. The future stretched before her, uncertain but full of possibility. "Have you thought about what you'll do now?" Ethan asked as they lingered over dessert. "With the trial behind you?" Clara considered the question. "I've been offered a position as a bookkeeper at the Loveland Bank. Mr. Peterson approached me before we left." Ethan's face registered surprise and something like disappointment. "That's wonderful. You'd be excellent at it." "I would," Clara agreed. "But I haven't accepted yet." "Oh," Ethan set down his fork. "May I ask why not?" Clara took a deep breath. "Because I've come to realize how much I enjoy the work at the ranch, not just the bookkeeping, but everything else. The rhythm of the seasons, the animals, the people." She paused. "And because I've come to care deeply for someone there." Ethan's expression transformed, hope kindling in his eyes. "Clara, you once offered to be my truth when everything else in my life was a lie," she continued, her heart racing. "You've been that and more. You've shown me what real honesty and integrity look like in a man, what real caring looks like." Ethan reached across the table to take her hand. "Clara Ward, I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood on that street in Loveland, determined to face your future no matter how uncertain it looked. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, they humble me daily." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I've been so afraid to trust my own heart again, to believe that what I was feeling could be real." "I know," he said gently, "and I've tried to give you the time and space you needed, but I can't go another day without telling you how I feel." He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Clara." "Simply and truly?" "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I think I have for months now." The journey back to Loveland seemed to pass in a dream. With the barriers between them finally down, Clara and Ethan spoke freely of their feelings, their hopes, and their dreams for the future. They agreed to take things slowly, to let their relationship develop naturally now that they had acknowledged their love for one another. Spring came early to Colorado that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Clara flourished in her role at the ranch, expanding her responsibilities beyond bookkeeping to include correspondence with cattle buyers and coordination of supply shipments. Ethan valued her input on business decisions, treating her as a true partner. In April, as wildflowers began to carpet the meadows around the ranch, Ethan took Clara on a picnic to her favorite spot overlooking the valley. They spread a blanket beneath an old oak tree and enjoyed a simple meal of cold chicken, bread, and early strawberries. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Clara asked as they sat side by side, watching clouds drift across the sky. "When I told you my husband was a lie." Ethan nodded, taking her hand. "I offered to be your truth." "You've kept that promise," she said softly, "even when I was too afraid to see it." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I want to make you another promise, one that I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." Clara's heart skipped as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not James Wilson or Thomas Blackburn," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I'm just Ethan Zachary, a rancher who loves this land and who loves you with his whole heart. I can't promise you wealth or luxury, but I can promise you honesty, respect, and devotion until my dying day." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "Clara Ward, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks as she looked from the ring to the man holding it. This was nothing like James's theatrical proposal with its practiced words and flashy diamond. This was real as the solid ground beneath them and the endless sky above. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Ethan Zachary, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands, kissing her with tender passion. Clara returned his kiss, pouring all her love and trust into the embrace. When they finally parted, Ethan explained, "The pearl was my mother's. My father gave it to her on their 20th anniversary." He touched it gently where it rested on her finger. "She told me before she died to give it to the woman who restored my faith in love." "I'll treasure it always," Clara promised, deeply moved by the sentiment. They were married on a perfect June day in 1877 beneath an arch of roses in the garden behind the Loveland Church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even Hiram Jenkins, who had eventually apologized properly for his behavior at the Harvest Festival. Clara wore a gown of cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, her hair adorned with a crown of wildflowers that Rosa had woven for her. Ethan, standing tall and proud at the altar, looked at her with such adoration that she nearly wept with joy. Pastor Simmons spoke of new beginnings, of trust rebuilt, and of love that grows stronger through adversity. When it came time for their vows, Clara and Ethan had chosen to write their own. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice steady and true, "I come to you with open hands and an honest heart. I promise to stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to respect your wisdom, to cherish your strength, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life. What we build together will be founded on truth and trust, a home where both our spirits can soar." Clara blinked back tears as she spoke her vows. "Ethan, you found me when I was lost and showed me the way back to myself. I promise to walk beside you as your equal partner, to face life's challenges with the same courage and integrity you've shown me, and to love you completely and honestly for all our days. With you, I've learned that real love isn't blind, it sees clearly and loves anyway." When Pastor Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. As Ethan kissed his bride, Clara knew with absolute certainty that this marriage, unlike her first, was built on the solid foundation of truth. The wedding celebration lasted well into the night with dancing, feasting, and much laughter. As the evening waned, Ethan led Clara away from the festivities toward a waiting carriage. "Where are we going?" she asked, surprised. They had planned to simply return to the ranch after the celebration. "One more surprise," Ethan replied with a smile. "A proper honeymoon." The carriage took them not to the ranch but to the train station, where Ethan revealed he had arranged a 2-week trip to San Francisco. Clara, who had never seen the ocean, was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. Their honeymoon was a whirlwind of new experiences. The majesty of the Pacific Ocean, the bustle of a truly cosmopolitan city, elegant dinners, and the private intimacy of their hotel suite where they discovered each other as husband and wife. Clara found in Ethan a considerate and passionate lover who made their physical union as meaningful as their emotional one. When they returned to Loveland, they moved into the main house together, transforming it into their shared home. Clara's touches soon appeared throughout the room's fresh flowers, new curtains, books on the shelves. Ethan delighted in every change, seeing them as signs of their integrated life. In the fall, Clara discovered she was expecting their first child. Ethan's reaction first stunned silence, then whoops of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral made her laugh until tears streamed down her face. "A baby," he kept saying, his hands gently cradling her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Their son, William Robert Zachary, was born the following spring, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. Clara found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had imagined. Ethan proved to be an involved father, often carrying the infant in a sling across his chest as he went about his ranch duties, much to the amusement of the hands. As William grew from infant to toddler, the Zachary Ranch prospered under Clara and Ethan's joint management. They expanded their cattle operation, added a small apple orchard, and built a larger bunkhouse for the increasing number of ranch hands they employed. In 1880, their family grew again with the birth of twins, Emma Rose and Elizabeth Grace. The house filled with children's laughter, occasional tears, and the constant bustle of a growing family through it all. Ethan remained Clara's steadfast partner, never taking her for granted, always treating her with the respect and love he had promised in their wedding vows. They had disagreements, of course, as any couple does, but they faced them together with honesty and a willingness to truly listen to each other. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Clara with a newly built greenhouse behind the main house, knowing her love of growing things even in Colorado's harsh climate. Inside, he had planted roses, her favorite flower. "5 years," he said as they stood together among the fragrant blooms. "The happiest of my life." Clara leaned into his embrace, thinking of how far she had come from that devastating day when she learned her first marriage had been a sham. "Mine too," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "And we're just getting started." As the years passed, the legend of Clara and Ethan Zachary grew throughout Loveland and beyond. People spoke of how they had transformed a good ranch into a great one, how they had raised 3 remarkable children, and eventually welcomed a surprise 4th, James Ethan, in 1885, and how their marriage stood as an example of what a true partnership could be. For Clara, the greatest triumph was not the material success or even the respect of their community, though she valued both. It was the knowledge that she had rebuilt her life on a foundation of truth, creating something genuine, and lasting with a man who had kept his promise to be her truth when everything else had been a lie. On summer evenings, long after the children were grown and had families of their own, Clara and Ethan could still be found sitting together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Their hands would be intertwined, their conversation flowing easily between them, their love a testament to the enduring power of honesty, respect, and unwavering devotion. And sometimes, when the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara would remember that snowy Christmas Eve long ago when she had wished upon a snowflake for the courage to love again. Looking at the man beside her older now, his hair streaked with silver, but his blue eyes still clear and true, she would smile, knowing that some wishes do indeed come true if you're brave enough to catch them.